Hello, and thank you for joining us on this video. This video, we will highlight how to open and operate a disability resource provider office and build campus relationships. My name is Marie Lusk, and I'm the Director for the Office of Student Accessibility Services at Rush University in Chicago. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Matthew Sullivan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Sullivan. I'm the Assistant Director for Disability Resources at Washington University in St. Louis. And as Marie just mentioned, we are speaking today about opening and operating a DRP office and building campus relationships. This is an important area to address, as many of us are either taking over for someone, or like Marie and myself, we were tasked with establishing an office and presence when none existed prior. We'll be discussing institutional relationships, needs assessments, policies, funding, and we'll be providing you with examples throughout where we both learned something. Today, we're not addressing creating and implementing accommodations. Rather, we're focusing on establishing your presence as the new DRP and how to integrate yourself into the campus. The learning outcomes for today's sessions will be focused on describing key attributes of one's institution and explaining the importance of institutional culture and relationship to disability resources office development, articulating key elements of relationship building, recognizing methods of promising communication practices as they pertain to one specific campus environment, summarizing 3 separate areas of administrative development associated with disability resources office creation, and identify promising practices associated with policy, procedures, and financial planning, and finally, outlining pressing actionable items that must be addressed within the first year of office creation, development, or reestablishment. Building off of the learning objectives or outcomes, our objectives for today will be to discuss institutional dynamics that directly impact the manner in which a disability resources office is established. We're going to be outlining the process of establishing connections with key campus partners, comparing approaches of reviewing and creating administrative practices associated with policy and procedure development, and budget management and oversight. We're going to be reviewing fundamental components associated with the first year of establishing a disability resource office. And we're going to offer resources that provide guidance throughout the process.
We both agreed when we started preparing for this presentation that knowing your institution is critical for a DRP success within the institution. What type of institution are you in? Where do you work? Are you city, urban, rural, large university, or a small college? What messages are they sending? What are their values and mission? What is the culture? Are students valued? And if so, how does the institution communicate it? So at Rush University, we are a private health science urban institution located in Chicago on the near west side. Rush has 4 colleges, a graduate college, health science college, a medical college, and a college of nursing. We have 3 bachelor programs, 3 master's programs, 3 PhD programs, 4 professional doctorate programs, and 5 certificate programs. Our enrollment averages around 3,000 students per academic year, and our history spans more than 180 years. Rush has been a part of the Chicago landscape longer than any other healthcare institution in the city. In fact, Rush Medical College received its charter on March 2nd, 1837, 2 days before the city of Chicago was incorporated. Rush Medical College was the first medical college in Chicago and one of the earliest in the Midwest.
Whereas Washington University, kind of similarly well known to Rush, is a top 10 tier 1 research institution located in St. Louis, Missouri. The School of Medicine is heavily focused on research and is associated with the Barnes Jewish Medical Practice. The vision of Washington University School of Medicine is as follows. Washington University School of Medicine will lead in advancing human health through the promotion of wellness and delivery of outstanding healthcare, innovative research, and the education of tomorrow's leader in biomedicine within a culture that supports diversity, inclusion, critical thinking, and creativity. On top of that, our vision is lofty and intimidating, to say the least. But what can be more intimidating is that the institution strongly prescribes to its vision. The School of Medicine was established in 1891, and since inception has 19 Nobel laureates. And with that, U.S. News rankings for our School of Medicine programs include our Research Medical School ranked at number 11, our Physical Therapy program ranked at number 1, our Occupational Therapy program ranked at number 3, and our Audiology program ranked at number 6. These are just a few of our programs. We have in total 39 programs within our School of Medicine and approximately 4,000 students registered and enrolled. For the rankings, I bring this up just to illustrate how the culture and mission of the institution can then inform our practices in disability resources. Understanding the focus our institution has on research and advancement helps me understand the culture of my faculty, my fellow staff members, and the students our institution is attracting. Not only do we have high-performing faculty members, but we also have an institutional commitment to diversity, inclusion, and critical thought and creativity. And it's really informed not only how I navigate with my faculty members, but also how I promote that vision to the students with whom I work. The mission and values also tell me everything I need to know about my institution, and it helps me understand what I'm getting myself into as a DRP. We must understand our own personal philosophies as they're associated with disability resource provision and whether or not those philosophies align with the current culture of the system within which we work. Knowing our institutions helps us know that we need to look into implicit and explicit factors related to some of these components. For example, I stepped into a newly created role. Prior to my arrival, there had not been an established and centralized DRP at our School of Medicine. Instead, it was segregated and separated between each department. Ultimately, then there was a committee that worked through accommodation determinations. And as you may know, there are a lot of challenges associated with the committee-based decision-making process for accommodations. So understanding that, they realized they needed an impartial DRP to come in to begin working with the student population. As such, there was a memorandum of understanding developed between our School of Medicine and our main campus at WashU. And my position itself is funded through the School of Medicine, but I report directly through disability resources on our main campus. I spend part of my time on site at the School of Medicine in the same location as the campus life and curriculum and design and student affairs functions. And then for the other part of the time, I'm at the main campus or working remotely. Prior to COVID, many institutions relied on presence to build relationships, but we need to consider how that may differ in this new era. With the creation of my position, I've advocated that I'll need to be on the School of Medicine campus in an office that is within proximity to key student affairs offices. It was initially communicated to me that on-campus staff needed to be in an office for at least 3 days a week to guarantee a space. Otherwise, they would need to use hoteling offices or offices that would be reserved kind of more on notice or within a week prior, and they could be anywhere throughout the School of Medicine. And while I understand that this new policy is important to make sure that we're intentionally using spaces, we were able to secure an office space by communicating that having a designated office for disability resources not only allows consistency of service, it also creates a symbolic representation of the culture we're trying to enhance, one that places importance on creating an inclusive and welcoming environment for disabled students. Furthermore, the designation confirms to disabled students that they are represented and supported as an invaluable, diverse entity of the institution.
At Rush University, we have a mission, vision, and value statements for all students and employees to adhere to. How your institution presents itself through these statements is relevant as you want your office or department and practices to align with them. Our mission speaks to providing outstanding health science education and conducts impactful research in a culture of inclusion, focused on the promotion and preservation of the health and well-being of our diverse communities, while our vision states that our learning community will be the leading health sciences university committed to transforming healthcare through innovative research and education. Our core values, innovation, collaboration, accountability, respect, and excellence, or ICARE, are the roadmap to our mission and vision, meaning when I engage with students, faculty, and staff, I am being mindful to implement them in my day-to-day practices. Our mission, vision, and values are published on our website, in our student syllabi, and signage all across campus. By knowing the culture of your institution and understanding everyone's roles and how do we integrate these practices into the institution, understanding your philosophy and how it's aligned or misaligned with the institution's current state of affairs, and also knowing your institution also carries over to knowing the people within the institution and how best to serve and how to work with them.
Disability resources practitioners are typically common disruptors of the system. However, in order to effectively disrupt systems, we need to first know the system. So as I mentioned earlier, having that background context of the institution's mission, vision, and values. I began my role a little over a year ago, and if I began making changes before fully understanding the culture of the institution, I would have been doing a disservice to my students, and it would have been detrimental to my success in the role. Having experience with establishing the DR office previously, I knew that there were a couple of things I should do before making changes. The first was to write down my assumptions about the programs and to then begin challenging those assumptions. For example, assumption number one for myself was that there may be a rigidity amongst the faculty and staff in relation to how they work with students. However, in reality, there were a couple of realities that came from that. Number one was faculty, especially faculty within our Dean of Student Support offices, are incredibly supportive. Our institution also has many in-depth supportive measures to help and assist students who need remediation or additional resources as they progress through the medical education program. Reality number two, a second aspect to this assumption, however, is that this culture of support and care is somewhat newer for the institution. Within the last 5 to 10 years, there's been this shift in medical education to ensure access and inclusion for marginalized students. What I've learned through my informational meetings with key stakeholders is that our Dean of Students office is incredibly supportive. In fact, the level of support provided has been straining to the system in some ways and making it so that other staff members may need to drop everything to make changes for students or really push themselves in order to meet the students' requests. Reality number three is that this way of work does not necessarily align with how disability resources can effectively support the access-related needs of students. So within my role since that first year, there has been this need to helping our Dean of Students office and helping our faculty draw lines, helping them understand what we must do and what we need to do as a component of disability and what accommodations we must implement. But then that frees up their resources to then further understand what does it mean to accommodate a student and what does it mean to independently care for a student as they would for any student in the program.
And moving on into this discussion, physically, where on campus is your office? As Matt referenced how his setup has changed since he started in this office and tying in how COVID has affected that. It's very important that it's published as to where we are located. So where is your office? Is it accessible? Does it provide confidentiality? Is it near your other support team members? At Rush, my first office was in the Office of Student Affairs suite with financial aid, financial affairs, and the registrar's office. Students reported back to me that they really didn't feel comfortable coming down to the suite because there were student aides working in other departments and they felt very uncomfortable. And they felt that they could be outed because my role at Rush is just accessibility for our students. So there's no other way to mask. A student was coming to me because they have a disability and they want to explore what their options are within the institution. So my accommodated testing room when I started was on the 9th floor. I was on the 4th floor and it only sat 4 students at the time. This was not an ideal situation if we had issues with testing. So I was able to bring this concern to my administrators and say, I'm going to need to find a space that's separate from other areas where student aides are, that provides privacy and confidentiality. And I needed to be closer to my testing room, if not next door to them. So that way I could assist the proctors and work with students if there were any issues during the test taking time. Additionally, my space was moved to a newer testing room with more spaces, and we were right next to our instructional designers and our IS team. So it was a very ideal move for my department. Another thing you have to think about is who is on your team. Who do you work with, and why does this matter? So I'm housed in the Division of Student Affairs, that's with financial aid, the registrar's office, and student life and engagement. I'm an office of two. It's myself as the disability director and my testing coordinator. We have 2 additional independent contractors to help us assist with proctoring all of the exams that we issue. And remote working, it's really important to note that. What is your institution's stance on this post-pandemic? Some institutions have returned 100%. Others, like myself and Matt, it's kind of a hybrid, on campus and remote. But what's important to be mindful of is communicating that to your students and faculty so that people aren't sitting out in front of your door when you're remote for that day. So I have now an online scheduler, and students are much more aware of how I work within the institution, be it remotely and or on campus. Now we want to move on to establishing connections and developing that effective communication styles. How do you communicate with your new colleagues? Each institution varies in regards to communication. You will want to discover what works best for your office, but also aligns with the institution. Finding that balance will assist the DRP to communicate with students, faculty, administrators, and to aid in open communication. Inquire what method of communication is preferred at your institution, meaning, does your marketing or PR team provide an etiquette manual so you know what is the preferred fonts, templates, and email signatures you are to adhere to? Are there specific times that emails are supposed to be sent out across the institution? Between Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, for example. How do you get your message out about your office? Is your information located in all the admission letters? Is information about your office published in your course syllabi across the university? What about orientation sessions? Are you being invited to those? What about the new student welcome fairs or online orientations? Is there space for you to come and speak and or provide a pre-recorded session? And of course, the website. You must be clear about how faculty, staff, and students can contact you and how you will reciprocate. You should also set your voicemail to inform callers of how to reach you if you're not in the office, for example, by email. This is a great opportunity to educate students, faculty, and staff about confidentiality in electronic messages. I always remind my faculty every academic year, be mindful of what is sent out electronically. Inform faculty not to disclose student names in emails. Initials can be utilized, and or they can just simply say, I have a student who said the following or who shared the following. We want to be mindful of this because all emails can be subpoenaed. So we want to make sure they're professional and not containing any personal opinions. Educating your faculty and staff on these protocols for your office will aid in their better understanding of it and how best to continue to collaborate on student cases and equal access throughout their educational experience for our students.
In addition to our connections with our faculty members, we must be aware of our colleagues' roles within the institution. We by no means are stating that we must be experts on financial aid, for example, but rather DRPs must know where to refer a student. It is important to establish connections with other departments our students interact with to gain a better understanding of their services and role within the institution. I'm not an expert in LOAs, but I know our process should a student inquire. And I need to direct them to the correct office so that they can learn more information about that process should they need to engage in a leave of absence. These relationships will take time to build and cultivate, and we must be calculated and intentional in our outreach. If we want to create an office that promotes a universal standard that this work matters, then we must take time to invest in our colleagues and students. From a personal standpoint, it's also important to understand your own communication and conflict styles. Conflict typically arises when two individuals are motivated by different goals. As a best practice, we need to understand the goals of our colleagues to then influence through partnership. From a communication and conflict perspective, regardless of your institution's values, we must know first who we are. For communication, are we time sensitive in our communication? For example, looking at the clock, there's always one foot out the door when we're asking questions, and we're always on the go. Or are we relational and focused on investing with the person-to-person connections and really diving deep and wanting to know how your colleagues' days are going? For conflict, how do you prefer to approach conflict? Do you handle situations head on, diving into the deep end without a second thought? Or when approaching discord, are you methodical and calculated in how you engage with others to come to a resolution? Once we understand our personal perspectives on conflict and communication, we can then begin the process of integrating with our organizations. As we continue looking through faculty-colleague relationship building, the next important question to ask yourself is, how do your faculty and colleagues take in information? We just discussed in the previous slide about communication, how to get your message out, but how that information is interpreted and acted upon is different. I simply ask my colleagues, what is the best way for me to communicate information and updates from my office? I received great information and suggestions that aided in my process of building sustainable relationships throughout. Right now, since we are in this somewhat hybrid and virtual environment due not only to COVID, but just the nature of how everything is evolving, my campus community uses Microsoft Teams commonly. However, a lot of the departments I work with may not use Teams, but they may still be hybrid. So for some of them, I know that I can call them and it will route to their desktop phone. But for some of my programs, I need to email and make sure that we're able to connect in some way, shape, or form through that avenue. But it just depends.
That's really important to note. And also, who else do you and your students and faculty interact with? It is really important to be mindful that our students will encounter a lot of individuals during their education. DRP should be apprised of the student support staff within the college and institutions so you're aware of all of their roles. Does your college or program have their own admin, assessment team, IS/IT support team, simulation OSCE team, instructional designers, academic coaches and tutors, counseling, wellness, or health centers, clinical and clerkship teams, legal, risk management, and infection control? Ask and seek out this information so you are informed of their existence and how best to work with them. There's a lot of networking that goes into being a DRP. Ask your faculty for introductions when new faculty members are hired, and when there is turnover in different departments, do your best to introduce yourself, explain what your role is, and ask them how best to communicate with them, because you want to ensure that all of your information is accurate and up to date, because what we do is very timely.
Once you've been able to establish those relationships with your colleagues across the institution, you must then foster and develop them. Again, this goes to communication and knowing your institution. It can take time to build up a relationship as we are all very busy and have a lot of work to do. But I found a simple email to check in has gone a long way with my colleagues. From there, as Marie just alluded to, we need to identify our key stakeholders. Who are the department leadership? Who are our clinical coordinators? Who are our IT connections, curriculum developers, admin assistants, admissions? We then need to look at who are the initial outreach communications that we need to get into. So who do we first reach out to in those departments to get our foot in the door? And then the importance of introductions and communication prior to issues and complex circumstances arise. We must continuously interview our colleagues. And what I mean by interview is constantly seek to understand their philosophies and motivations. Sometimes this is rooted in a busy work environment, but sometimes it's just rooted in a lack of understanding of where each individual is approaching their work. So the more we consistently interview our colleagues and seek to understand the more beneficial our partnerships will be in the long run.
Building upon maintaining relationships, what we mean by invite yourself to the table is to be aware of the types of meetings held across your campus that impact accessibility, and it is vast. Know your contacts from those working groups and ask to be invited to meetings to keep faculty and staff apprised of updates from your department. I attend program meetings annually. I email my directors and tell them I would appreciate 15 to 30 minutes to provide updates and take questions from the group. I also will suggest that questions be sent to me in advance if there is something more complex the group wishes to discuss. And being mindful that DRPs do not just work with faculty, as we've just spoken about. We work with clinical supervisors and staff who run simulation programs. We work with instructional designers who manage learning management systems such as Blackboard and Canvas. We work with executive faculty and council. We work with wellness, counseling, and health centers. And some of us have to work with housing and areas that oversee dietary for people who live on campus. And of course, campus transportation and safety. All of these are important areas that a DRP should be mindful of. So do your best to get to know the people in these areas and invite yourself to a meeting. Next, we want to address the budget. Where does your money come from? You need to know exactly how your money works. Sit down with your boss or supervisor and ask very specific questions on what you are required to do. When do you need to produce a budget? And who is a part of the funding or financial process at your institution? Do you need to create contracts for vendors? What forms are required? What is the turnaround time for purchasing equipment for an accommodation? Do you have in-house vendors you are contracted with to obtain goods from? What do you need to do to purchase something quickly? And what kind of things should be on a budget? It took me a little bit of time to understand the process at Rush and how it worked. My biggest barrier it was because I started in the middle of the second quarter of the fiscal year and I had no budget for my office when it opened. Technically, my office didn't exist on paper until July 1 of 2017, while I had started in November of 2016. So all requests for my office related to money had to come from our student affairs budget. I have since obtained my own budget and do my best to anticipate what student needs may arise for each approaching academic year. So when that time comes for me to build my budget out for the office, I have 3 lines: standard accommodations, things such as scribe services, sign language interpreters, captioning, computer programs such as Dragon, or equipment and diagnostic evaluations. My second line item are operations, staff salaries such as my proctors and office supplies and marketing. And 3, professional development such as CEUs, conferences, and symposiums. So I spoke to my colleagues in my division and did a little research at other institutions to see what is the norm for this kind of department. Because again, my office didn't exist before I came on board in November of 2016. My business office also provided resources and assistance on how to utilize our budgetary program in our network. But they were also a great resource for any questions or concerns that I had with structuring my budget. Reflecting back, I wish I would have been a bit more aggressive in my budget planning. While I knew my caseload would grow, I did not anticipate how fast it would grow and thereby requiring more time for our proctors, more assistive technology, more site licenses, equipment, such as like a motorized wheelchair. Things I knew I would need, but I didn't know it would happen so quickly. I was more conservative and a bit naive at the time of making my budgets. Whereas because I started at a budget of 0, and for example, for my academic year 2021 to 2022, my operating budget was only $198,000, and it should be significantly more. But because the student caseload rose so quickly, the budget can't move as fast because, as we all know, those are things you have to project out year to year.
That is a good point. For WashU, it's very similar to Marie's first year and her role. And it's been a lot of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable to a degree. At the moment, I don't have a current designated budget for accommodations. And thankfully, this really hasn't been needed just yet. But it is constantly on the back of my mind. In a previous role, I managed a budget that included service providers, full-time, part-time staff, auxiliary aides, and technologies. And what I realized is that the most important budget lines are related to personal and staff needs. When accommodations are necessary for equitable access, the response I receive from my administration has always been, we will find it. So from those components, if your institution is committed to making sure disabled students have what they need in the forms of accommodations, budgets and money will be allocated towards those needs. That is the commitment the institution is making. They will fulfill on that commitment. However, the same has not always been true when requesting professional development dollars. So when you are creating your budgets, when you are looking through what you need to outline for your administration, my strongest suggestion would be to advocate for a designated professional development or educational fund and make sure that the budget line is either separate or understood as separate from your accommodation-based dollars. From those components, so why that is so important is if you have just one singular budget line that states disability resource office operational costs, and everything is lumped into that. If you have a student who needs Braille or a student who needs interpreters, very quickly that fund will be absorbed by those needs. So if they are soaked up by those interpreters or service providers, quickly you can then have a lack of money for yourself or your staff in order to educate yourself consistently, in order to know how to do your job effectively. On the next slide, I will show you just an example of a budget exercise that I previously used to help build a budget at one of my former institutions. As you will notice within this PowerPoint or this slide itself, is that my institution categorized expenses within my department. And these were the expenses that were commonly unassociated because our money is so tied to accommodation-based needs. I wanted to make sure that we were separating things out in a clear and convincing manner, showing that we have dues and memberships for our professional organizations. We do have the need for books or subscriptions to journals. So when I look at higher ed compliance, how much does that cost through Wiley to making sure that we can continuously get those resources? In addition, it's looking at those components of airfare, hoteling space, seminar, and conference registration fees. As you'll see in this spreadsheet, so to speak, there was a budget allocated towards my office. However, it wasn't sufficient over a few years of being there. So my goal was to making sure of outlining what do we currently have in the pot of money versus what do we need, or what is the suggested amount that we would need in order to making sure our staff got the educational opportunities we needed in order to do our jobs effectively. So when it comes to your own work in your offices, look at those costs associated with accommodations. Understand what you will need in order to effectively serve your students, but also don't forget about yourselves. Don't forget about the professional development education that you will need as a practitioner in order to then effectively serve not only your students, but your campus and your institution as a whole. Jumping off of the previous spreadsheet, we also need to understand that we are stewards of our money, and we must demonstrate ethical financial practices. And what I mean by that is that sometimes administration will say, well, if you tell me that it is necessary for equitable access, we must do it, but then we'll do it. And that creates sometimes a bit of a trap from DRPs to saying, well, we have to do it, and we have to buy this because it's the law. When ultimately we need to sit back and reflect, is it this that we must purchase? Do we have to have this one piece of equipment? Does it have to be cart services? Does it have to be this one vendor we must partner with in order to making sure that this student has access? Sometimes the answer to that question is yes. This is the only way that we can make sure that this student has access to our programs. However, there may be other options that exist. So while budgets may be established for providing accommodations, there are also many other options that can be used either at no cost or very low cost. Technology advances within the last 10 years have been astronomical. So for that, I look at speech to text. When it comes to speech to text, really and truly, Dragon was one of those programs that you had to have if you wanted accurate speech to text software. Now, you can have speech to text software just by doing voiceovers on your phone. You can use Microsoft Dictate. You can go into other programs such as Otter AI if you want full captions. It doesn't have to be one thing anymore. We have options available. And the more we're able to explore these options in order to meet the needs of our students with disabilities, we can also then provide these options to students who may not be disabled, who still need academic resources, because Microsoft Dictate is available to all students. Just when you're getting tired and you want to be able to speak what you're meaning to write in your paper, it provides that option. In addition, you have the text-to-speech option through Microsoft when it's just difficult to read a computer screen and you just want to copy that text and press play so then you can listen to it. These options are available to everyone. So if you want more information on some of these low or no cost items, reach out to your colleagues throughout the nation. There are many who are using these pieces in very innovative ways and would be happy to share their knowledge with you.
So the first year, what landmines exist? What should you do in your first year? We have listed realistic goals for the new DRPs to meet during their first year, but we both realize it will vary from school to school. Understanding the programs your students are enrolled in and creating your contact list, introducing yourself and building relationships, and publishing and updating policies and procedures are vital. Understanding your institution's mission, vision, values, communication styles will also aid in the development of your relationships and presence on campus.
In addition to some of those more logical and process-based things, we have to also understand that understanding our institutions goes past the administration of working responsibilities. As whole people, we need to understand our capacity to effectively perform work-related responsibilities. As such, it is important to develop a personal, professionally grounded understanding of self-care and work-life balance. Balance is tricky, and really and truly in our field of work, it's difficult because everyone's threshold for what amount of work is unmanageable is different. So I typically think of work-life balance as a teeter-totter. At times, I know that there's going to be a 2-ton elephant sitting on the other side of that teeter-totter, keeping me in the air with no option of coming down. However, other times when the elephant leaves, there may only be a 100-pound German Shepherd. So we get to more equitably participate in that activity. However, ultimately, I will never categorize balance as checking work at the door or limiting myself or others to an 8:30 to 5 p.m. schedule. Rather, I encourage my staff and myself to strive for serenity. Our work environments are chaotic, but it doesn't mean we must enable the chaos. When we let hectic energy influence our decisions, we begin to make mistakes. When we adopt a mentality of serenity, we accept challenge for what it is and move forward using the tools with which we have been equipped. So you need to look at that within your first year. What does balance look for yourself? How might that change going into the second or the third year? But also know that you can't hold yourself to the same standards as someone who works in financial aid or campus life. Their positions may put them in a type of balance that is for the first 3 months of school, they're on campus from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. That doesn't mean you are doing less work if during that same time frame you are getting at 8:30 and leaving at 5. That is fine, because there may be other times of the year where you do have to stay a little later or come in a little earlier. Forgive yourself for some of those comparisons and make sure that ultimately you are doing what you are able to fulfill the responsibilities of your role within your own capacity. As we near the end of this session, we wanted to be able to give a few practical applications of this work, of establishing your office and navigating your new environments or navigating relationships. Of course, we're all trailblazers, and we want to leave a lasting impression with those that we work for and with. However, I learned early on that there's no need to go 0 to 45 the second the light turns green, only to be abruptly stopped by a red light a block away. When it comes to establishing our presence as a DRP, we need to be intentional and we need to be slow paced. Everything will happen in due time. I say this because early on at a previous institution, when I was establishing resources for their allied health campus, I had really strong relationships with our anatomy faculty and working within our cadaver lab. I actually also supervised tutors within the lab, so I was there on a regular basis. When working with one of our students who needed cart services in the lab, we were partnering with our cart providers, the students, and the lab coordinators to making sure that it would work. We had text and at that point, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Young man, no one's getting into my lab without my permission." And even though I'd already been in the lab multiple times throughout that summer and the summer prior, it did offset me just a little bit. It made me kind of come back to the ground and realize just because I've been working with specific stakeholders doesn't mean everyone is aware of the work that I do. So as I have gone to other institutions and either established my office or established myself as a practitioner, I've needed to take the time to more effectively connect with my colleagues, help them understand what I am here to do, and help them to understand how we could best work together. Establishing my office at WashU and our School of Medicine, a part of this process has been understanding how accommodations were previously implemented. And not only how were they implemented, but how are they worded? Knowing that language matters within our letters of accommodations, that was one of the largest undertakings as we transitioned to this new process. From there, I needed to meet quite often with many of our key stakeholders to stating, here's what the accommodation previously said within the letter of accommodation, here's what I am rewording it to get to a place of more specifics, more directness, and more understanding, so that there was less room for error or for question from the side of the student or the faculty. Throughout this process, there has been some questions that have come up, but it's been easier to navigate when my faculty have known that my goal in this process is to making it so that there is clarity. So if there is concerns with the letter of the writing, they come back to me. They know that they can ask me questions. They can make suggestions. They know that I am open for the feedback and I'm not just going to come back and say, nope, this is what it must be. Instead, I am open and receptive to their communication so that we can work together in this process.
And what Matt just highlighted is so important, that open communication. I have sent draft language to my faculty and clinicians and stated, does this make sense in your unit? Because I cannot create blanket statement. I need to collaborate with my faculty and clinical staff to ensure, will it make sense when the preceptor is reading it? We have clinical educators, clerkship supervisors, residents, fellows, and everything in between that our students are engaging with. So it's so important to say, this is the accommodation, but I want to make sure my language reads correctly. So it's so important to be able to initiate those conversations with those stakeholders. And in addition to identifying pre-existing processes, I have an example that during those my first year at Rush, I noticed I had multiple injured students, and it was causing the faculty and I and clinical staff and even administrators to find solutions and fast. But after 2 years of reacting, I came to a few key stakeholders, legal, risk, infection prevention, program directors, and said, we need a better process. If students are going to schedule a surgery and they're going to need recovery time, we need to implement a temporary accommodation process. Same with thinking for our students who fall and break a wrist or break their arm or fracture an ankle, which happens across the country. What do we do when we have an injured student? How do we approach this? So I wanted to have discussions, and I brought this discussion across my colleges to program directors and clinical staff and said, what does an injury like this look like for your rotations, for your programs? Because a student with a broken arm may not need as many clinical accommodations and say like an occupational therapy student who has a very physical, rigorous program. They do a lot of lifting, bending, twisting with their patients. But for a student who may be more in an observational role, a cast may just simply be a cast. And we just may need to address it as the student is observing in this unit, but we just need to think about, the cast be under a uniform or do we need to drape it? So by having these conversations with the key stakeholders and knowing that I had already created a process of requesting accommodations, we then said, institutionally, we now have a policy, and it's published, for seeking short-term and or temporary accommodations. And it stemmed from us all experiencing these situations and all agreeing, we don't want to be reactive, we want to be proactive. And now, yes, we do still get a curveball here and there, but because we have all been working on this together for 6 years, we come together so quickly. It's not an automatic leave of absence. It's more of we need to pause for a week and a student can sit off a unit for a week while we determine what we can do and where we can remediate the time. And again, there are incidents or injuries or illnesses that do cause a student that a leave of absence is the only course, so they may take care of themselves and heal, and that's fine. But when there are programs that have more flexibility, what can we do? Are there alternate ways to showcase their proficiency? And finally, I wanted to kind of share one other way that by just working together and continuously communicating, that we came up with a very good solution. And this stemmed from my College of Nursing. We have a master's in nursing program, and we started to notice a trend with an increase in practicum or the clinical accommodations for our nursing students on the unit. And faculty kind of came to me and said, I'm worried I'm going to miss a student. Can we just review the students who are in this practicum to make sure we have everything set up? And again, thinking back to the temporary accommodation concerns that we had, we don't want to be reactive. So if a student needed a specific site consideration or a student cannot do overnights, I wanted to bring that to the faculty well in advance. So I reflected back on my social work career, and case management is a great way to do this. So I came to my faculty in nursing in the fall of 21 and said, what if we get together before the semester begins? I screen share and show all of the practicum accommodations so all the faculty can review them and we can have a discussion and make notes of what do we need to prepare for, or faculty can then say, okay, this student, they have a transportation accommodation, they need to be reachable, they need to reach their clinical site by public transportation. Oh, so we cannot send them to a site that's 4 hours away in a rural part of Illinois. We need to be cognizant of these things. And I piloted it fall of 21. We did it again prior to the spring 22 semester, and we're still continuing this. And now I'm bringing this to other areas at Rush that are having more and more practicum or clinical accommodations, because having that time to be on a call and have the space to evaluate things and discuss things, the faculty amongst them said, oh, for that rotation, we had that student last semester. She actually did this, this, and this. So you might want to be cognizant of that. And we can then implement, utilize this, or this placement might be really ideal, which still allows equal access to the curriculum, but maybe working in an area that can meet the students' needs better. So some of these things are trial and error, but I'm finding that this was a great way to come together with the faculty and bring this to the institution, that it's not disability resource provider versus the institution. It is truly a collaboration. When I complete my intake with my student and go through that interactive process, I hear from them, the students, they are the experts in themselves. Then I can share with them, here's what you're going to be encountering throughout your entire educational experience, didactic, lab, clinical, sim, all of that. And then bringing it all together to have these comprehensive, cohesive meetings where everyone can just share and feel that their voice is heard, their concerns are addressed, and that way the students have equal access and an outstanding experience. So this is what's kind of led us to making these changes with that mindset of accessibility as the guiding star for our students.
When it comes to some resources that we'd like to recommend, some of them are related specifically to being a DRP within health sciences education, but other of them are not. In many ways, I look at a lot of external resources when it comes to my own personal development and how I can best navigate within a position. So for example, when it comes to leadership components, I look to Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I look to Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I also look at Start with Why by Simon Sinek. In addition, I look at that transitional period as also being key to when we can really capitalize upon our relationships, but also start to make changes within a new role. So from that first 90 days by Michael Z. Watkins, looking at mapping out what should be included in that initial phase, but then how can we make sure to sustain that transition as we move forward? And then finally, when it comes to specific resources related to our field, Equal Access for Students with Disabilities by Meeks, Jane, and Laird is a fantastic resource I would recommend to any either new DRP or well-established DRP.
Finally, we want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. We are so happy to have you join this profession and or have listened to this just to get a better understanding of the skills and tasks required to open and operate a disability resource provider's office. Thank you. Take care.